Thank you, Illia, for taking the time and joining me on the show today. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now. You are the co-founder of Near Protocol, which is a fully sharded proof of stake blockchain. Basically means it's high speed, low transaction fees, climate neutral, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty novel take on how to build a layer one blockchain. I think you guys got started around 2018 in the midst of the bear market, and basically saw all the existing layer one blockchains and some of the stuff that was coming in the future through white papers and whatnot, and thought you had a better way to do things. So went ahead and built Near Protocol. And fast forward a few years later, this is one of the more popular and exciting layer one blockchains in existence, and tons of users and high market cap and all the like, lots of funding. So very excited to have you on today to talk about it and talk about your story a little bit. And I think that's the best place to start, for those who don't know you, is your story. So the earlier you're willing to start, the better. And would love to hear about sort of how you got to where you are today, and some of the decisions you made along the way.
Sure, yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. And yeah, would love to share how we got here and hopefully where we're going. I think kind of the precipice of the story is I'm originally from Ukraine. I've been coding or kind of trying to build something since I was 10. And I would say initially I was mostly excited about games and video games because it felt like it's the easiest way to create worlds. And that always excites me. I actually wrote some fiction as well when I was kind of semi teenager and early 20s. And so like it always felt like a very powerful way to, turn your thought into the reality. And I think that, in many ways, kind of I think of computers and of technology in general as, as Steve Jobs says, bicycle for the mind, right? For this tool that allows us to continuously expand and do greater things. Um, Through that times, I've kind of started to also get interested in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and went to university actually because I was excited to study more in that direction. At the same time, living in Ukraine from somewhat, very kind of not so well off family, let's just say, started looking for a job in the first year of college, university, ended up finding a job in a Ukrainian office of a machine learning company from San Diego. And so that was really exciting because it kind of combined both, being able to get paid for things that were really interesting to me. And so by the time I finished university, I was pretty much already had, 6 years of experience in machine learning, kind of across lots of different projects. And like that company was doing both building kind of core technology around decision trees as well as doing a lot of consulting and kind of projects, which was really cool. In parallel, both in high school and university, I was doing the competitive programming, which for people who are not familiar is pretty much a kind of competition alternative to other forms of sports, but where you sit in front of a computer and try to solve problems as fast as possible, writing software that then gets tested automatically and you getting score. And it's both like personal and team, and it in a way trains you to both write really kind of correct code because you need to actually like pass all the tests, which are usually testing all kind of exceptional cases, as well as to really apply all of these algorithms and kind of computer science that you're studying. And so I think that was really good experience, as well as, fast forwarding how I met my co-founder. And so the kind of, balancing that for a bit and then kind of went to work full time for the machine learning company, moved to San Diego, and worked there. That was a really cool experience because obviously coming from Ukraine, you know, adjusting the world from living in, what Ukraine was, I guess, 10 years ago to coming to US was a very interesting experience. But at the same time, the company was pretty small and it wasn't growing per se. It was really kind of in a stable state. And so I was looking for some kind of challenge and opportunity. And so I started looking at Bay Area both as a way to kind of find a challenge, but also I saw the deep learning coming. I saw a lot of kind of exciting new things coming out of that. That was 2012, 2013, which was not like deep learning was not the same decision trees what everybody used. If you look at Google Ads, that all of the kind of machine learning that was happening back then, it was all decision trees. And I really thought that kind of neural networks will be the future. And so I ended up joining Google Research to really work on that. And for me, the part that's always exciting and kind of I thought is the closest to the kind of working directly on human intelligence level AI is knowledge. Like anything that you can do to manage, extract, and kind of answer from knowledge is a way to truly test the intelligence of machines. Like that's why, although a lot of people working on image, generation and image recognition and image perception, like I always say, there's, I think, millions of species that have vision, and there's only one that actually can like talk and answer questions. And so I was really excited to work on that. I had like at the end we were a team that worked across natural language translation, question answering, knowledge extraction, kind of lots of different things at Google. And so that also led to one of the, at this point, kind of probably most influential papers of past 5 years called Attention is All You Need, which is what a lot of the current natural language and image understanding and a lot of other kind of deep learning models are based on. That was really cool. That was kind of interesting experience. At the same time, Google has a set of, I would say, interesting design choices of organization, right? That were really, I would say, limiting. And kind of it makes sense, like at a company of that size, but if you're trying to move fast and try to achieve interesting things, that is something that's kind of hard to overcome. And so I left, I joined forces with Alex, and so we met Alex through, so he was also a competitive programmer, way better than me. He has a gold medal at the world level, and I only competed at the Ukrainian level. And we've kind of teamed up to work on Near AI. And so Near AI was the idea to take on kind of machine translation approach as well as some other techniques and to generate programs from natural language cues. So think of it like you just say what you want and it will just write code for you. Which I mean, we were a bit early and had way less compute that was needed to actually get this going. But it was also a really interesting experience of like trying to build a startup, raising first funds, figuring out how to actually test your hypothesis without even building anything. Like we've done a bunch of kind of experiments where we would put just a simple prompt in front of users and ask them to just kind of describe what they want and see if we can kind of, as a human, even fulfill those prompts. One of the cool things we ended up building was a crowdsourcing system where we had lots of people around the world that were trying to, or like doing tasks for us, and mostly around coding, around kind of describing code, writing code, figuring out kind of just how to solve some problems. And that was all feeding the data training data we needed for our models. Now, the problem with that was that these people were around the world, right? We did not like localize and say, hey, only this, like, this country or whatever. And so we needed to pay them for this work into countries like China, Russia, Ukraine, Poland, kind of around the world, which ended up being really complicated because the kind of a lot of countries have different kind of restrictions. You have, PayPal doesn't work in one place. Some people don't have bank accounts. Mostly these people are students. Some of them didn't have like a way to accept international currency like dollars into their country. And so it ended up being like a pretty big problem, just like paying people small amounts of money around the world. And that's where the blockchain enters because, well, that's literally a tagline for the blockchain, global payment system for microtransactions. And so we started looking at kind of the world of blockchain, and this is somewhere around May 2018, kind of already, hype happened and then started to kind of lower down. And so we started looking more as like, okay, well, if we build this crowdsourcing system using blockchain, kind of how would we build it? What would we do? And so that was pretty interesting kind of exploration because we looked at a lot of the different solutions that were available at that point and that people worked on. And as you mentioned in the beginning, did not find anything that would like, as a developer, like, hey, okay, this is the instrument I'm going to use and I'm going to go and build my product, right? That like we did not find anything like that. It was all like, okay, well, this is a thing that maybe at some point will work, or this thing that clearly doesn't work, right? I think like in my original blog post, I kind of dunked on a couple of blockchains which already don't exist, including some of them like were pretty easily corruptible. And so that was like really the origination of this. We're like, well, if we as developers and kind of product builders want to use blockchain and we cannot find a solution for ourselves, and our background is in building kind of systems, including my co-founder built a sharded database before that's used for Fortune 500 companies. We're like, well, it seems like this is an opportunity to actually solve this problem for everyone and then go and build the product we want to build, right? And so we actually started bringing the original team with this idea that, hey, we want to build infrastructure and it's decentralized. So, like it's not that you need to forever then run a company to maintain it, although obviously there's still a lot more work always to be done. But the idea is that the original team would then go on and build kind of applications and various products on top of this. And so, so we went from kind of 3 people working on AI in beginning of August to 9 people working on blockchain, kind of like having 7 engineers and 2 non kind of technical business side. So yeah, that was a pretty interesting transition. Obviously, also going in knowing very little, I would say, about blockchains at the time, being a little bit overconfident that we can actually do it pretty quickly. At the same time, we realized that we need to learn, and so we started this kind of video podcast called Whiteboard Series, where we interviewed a lot of other blockchains. Kind of, I think at this point, like almost 50 videos now. We're really trying to dig in how exactly they work and actually asking really tough questions, and in some of them, kind of breaking their approach. But that allowed not just us, but everyone to kind of understand deeper, like what exactly is happening with this protocols, right, on the technical side versus kind of marketing. And for us, it allowed us to kind of also almost like survey the space in a way that we really well understand kind of the trade-offs that everybody's taking.
Yeah, that's a great story and appreciate you sharing it. I want to drill in a little bit into this like early assessment that you made of the existing blockchain projects when you guys were building this basically crowdsourced tasking system and trying to figure out how to pay people globally and couldn't find a blockchain that you wanted to build on. I understand like around that time, I think you took a close look at like EOS and IOTA and obviously Ethereum. I imagine you paid some attention to. And you mentioned that like you might have been overconfident in how quickly you could build a new blockchain and sort of build the whole thing and have it be very successful. Obviously, it's been very successful, I think, by most standards in the first 3 or 4 years, first couple of years on mainnet now. But do you think has your original assessment of like what existed and what needs to exist changed, or is the primary thesis sort of consistent from May 2018 or whenever it was?
So it is actually pretty consistent. The kind of the core the core thing we're looking for is something that would try to solve for, I mean, I call it simplicity, right? It's like if you want to use this infrastructure, you should not need to understand the kind of all of the design choices and specifics of the implementation of the system, right? Similar how when you use, an Amazon cloud, you don't need to think about like how exactly they're laying out cables that connect computers and how exactly virtualization is working to move your EC2 instances between physical servers. And so like I still and at the same time it needs to be able kind of to scale with more demand, right? As more people come in, it should be able to increase its capacity as infrastructure. And so I don't think still anyone else is actually looking at this in this approach, right? I think people either trying to solve for existing technical problems that kind of they've faced with the previous iterations, or they are saying like, okay, well, we'll let developers and users to figure out exactly where things are. We're just gonna give them kind of the building blocks, right? And so it's kind of always pushing the complexity on developers and users versus really trying to reduce it and remove it from them. And so kind of from this perspective, I think I mean, a lot of people are thinking about it, but we're the only one who actually made a lot of design decisions kind of in and out of the protocol to get to that state. And I'm not saying like it's, fully there yet, but that's always been the goal.
Right. So, and when I think about Near, I think about primarily two things, which is scalability and usability. And I think those are, if not the top two, two of your primary focuses. Um, and when, scalability, of course, like is a, hot word in crypto, and all of these different blockchains are trying to figure it out. Ethereum notoriously has had high fees for varying periods of time during bull markets and the like. Everyone's trading NFTs, the gas fees go way through the roof, everything like that. Recently, of course, had ETH2 come along. And so there's various, and then you have like another, Solana comes along and they've got a way to do more transactions faster and cheaper as well. All these varying solutions taking different approaches. When I think about Near, it seems like you guys have really prioritized not just like the next step of scaling, for, being able to satisfy the demand in 3 years or 5 years or even 10 years. But you guys are really focused on like an infinitely scalable solution through this sharding mechanism that you guys have implemented, I think partially and are continuing to implement over time. So when I think about like sort of that strategy and that approach, it seems like one that would pay in the long run, right? Because for the next, 3 to 5 years, whatever it might be, all of the existing layer ones that are focusing on scaling for tomorrow and scaling for the next day and scaling for the next year and the next 3 and the next 5, they're going to probably continue to do fine. And there may or may not come a time where they sort of can't keep up anymore. And the way that they've built it sort of won't scale any further. And they need to sort of, I don't know what they would do, but, you see what I'm saying? Like, I feel like Near is a very long-term oriented project. And because of that, it might be expected to sort of take a long time to succeed, or at least to succeed, no longer being like a top 30 project, but being, top five or whatever it might be, top few, one of the most popular and used blockchains in the world. Do you sort of agree with that assessment? And if so, or whether you do or not, like, what do you think of sort of this long-term view, and what are some of the challenges of building for like the infinite future as opposed to a couple of years from now?
So I think there are two sides here. I think one side is, we are very long-term focused, and we've always been trying to trying to address the problems before they appear, right? And in a fundamental way. And I think that does differentiate us, but also obviously comes at the expense of it's either taking slower or people not always recognizing the value of that, right? I think like Rainbow Bridge is a really good example of like building the only trustless bridge to Ethereum at the time, right? Uh, Versus everybody just launched, a multi-sig, and kind of that, paid off in a way, but at the same time, it's still, it's almost like you need to market that if you've done it versus just having it working and people understanding the value of that and kind of value of like long-term correct solutions. But I think to your main question of, is the scalability kind of only needed in long term? I actually don't agree with that. And we actually have seen already that it doesn't work. We have seen it with Polygon, we have seen it with Avalanche, and we kind of seen it with Solana even, that when there is one really successful application, right, like Crabaro and Avalanche, there's like a few examples on Polygon, NFTs on Solana, the network really is not able to keep up. Like the kind of a single network that is trying to process everything is just not able to keep up for various reasons. And like there's ways to kind of patch it, but at the end, kind of the only way is to, quote unquote, shard the network. And so what we see Avalanche doing now is really just implementing sharding in the way they can with kind of what they have. And that's what I meant by like everybody's trying to patch kind of on top of what they already have, versus kind of stepping back and fundamentally solving the problems. And so like similar to Polygon, right? Polygon has now their whatever their alternative for subnets, and they're also trying to spin up rollups. And so like everybody is, even the layer twos are trying to spin up layer threes because they also understand they will not be able to scale. Like one app will just bring any layer two down now, that has like, proper, like enough users who are actually using it. So like the reality is like a single app, and we can talk about Sweatcoin as an example of that has 100 million users who actually want to use this stuff, will just bring any of this network to its knees. And there is ways to address it, to be clear. Like Solana have implemented, per account auctions, for example, to address some of these issues, and done a lot of optimization on networking side to kind of prevent DDoS. But at the same time, this is all patchwork for the fundamental issue that you need to parallelize across machines. You need to parallelize across kind of state and processing to be able to scale to something that is like global level, web level. And that's a lesson that everybody should have learned from Google, Facebook, and every other large company that exists. And so I think like that's a problem of already today, and we just actually have been building for that from the day one.
Right. So you mentioned Swagcoin as one of these apps that, potentially could break a system just by being too much user demand all at once. I know you guys had a very successful partnership launch with them, and would like to talk about that a little bit more. But before we get there, could we just double down a little bit on like, you say that sharding is sort of the only, and parallelization is sort of the only approach to scaling that will really work. I imagine there's people in the space who might disagree with you. What's your like most sort of fundamental explanation of why this is the only approach that will really work, and what are some of the other existing approaches that and what are the reasons that those won't work ultimately?
Well, I think there's honestly only two approaches. One is called, sharding, and people then call it in various ways depending which exact type of solution they are partial to. And then there is, scaling up the compute of a single kind of a single validator, right? Which is what, Solana took on and a few others are taking on. And they're kind of the idea that, the growth of the compute, the growth of the, SSDs becoming more performant, etc., networks becoming wider will outpace or at least match the pace of the adoption of the blockchain. That's kind of, in many ways the assumption there. At the same time, to be clear, they're still paralyzing. Like Solana and now the move based blockchains, they actually are also sharding. They're just doing sharding inside the one machine, inside the one node. And so because of that, your programming environment is actually still different from what people used to in Ethereum, for example, or like any other EVM based approaches. Because you need to kind of outline which pieces of data you'll be touching so that it can actually paralyze them, paralyze their processing. But it's still, it's limited by how much compute can one machine, or at least like one set of machines, process, as well as how much network can it receive and how much, how fast the drives are to save it. And honestly, the main bottleneck is actually even not the compute or networking for the most part. It's actually hard drives because we're trying, like as a blockchain, kind of conceptually, we want to have authenticated data that we want to prove to everyone that the data is correct. And the only way to do it is to actually like store it in this Merkle trees, and kind of there's like few variations of them, and that is way more expensive than normal databases would be. And so the limitations of kind of the blockchains right now are not in processing transactions, but actually in reading and saving state changes of the blockchain space as well. And so Solana actually, like, partially why it's kind of so much faster compared to other approaches is that they don't do it at a time. They only compute the Merkleization once some period of time, which kind of limits a lot of the proving points of the blockchain when data is fetched. Now, if we go back to sharding, what conceptual sharding is the idea that you want to be able to process more than what one, let's say computer can do, right? Imagine when the internet was just starting, you have a lot of users going to some website, and that website was hosted on one server, and there was more people trying to access it and trying to interact with it than that server can do. And so the idea was like, well, let's put more servers behind that can kind of in parallel provide access to these users. And so then you need to save the user data somewhere. Well, you cannot all put it on one server as well. Then that server will be overwhelmed. So you paralyze, kind of, you split the users between different computers. So some users are on one computer, some users data on another computer. And so you kind of grow on every single dimension. Like you're trying to paralyze the processing and storage of this data. And so in blockchain, kind of in very similar terms, sharding is this idea that you're not able to process all transactions on one, gigantic blockchain. You will need a lot of kind of parallel execution and places to store the state, to be able to handle, let's say when we get billions of users to actually interact with the blockchains. Now, kind of the way people approach it is based on whatever they started with, right? Ethereum has a roll-up approach because they already have a layer one that able to provide security, and so they're just trying to rely on that and build the parallelization kind of on top at the layer two. Similarly, Cosmos, for example, is going from a different direction, saying like, well, let's just developers who want to launch their own application run it completely in parallel to everything else, right? Nothing blocked, like nothing interacting, and then we just build the bridges between these applications as they can communicate and exchange value between each other. So that's like, kind of a spectrum where you have, one highly kind of one central place like Ethereum 1 where everything needs to settle on to communicate, or you have, Cosmos approach where everything is running in parallel and then there's intercommunication built in. And so what Near is taking all of these ideas and thinking from a different dimension, which is, well, what if we don't want users and developers to think about scalability, right? They should just use the blockchain as if it was a single entity. And so what that means is that there should be a single namespace for all the applications and user accounts. There should be kind of single, way to pay for fees. There should be single pay way to kind of understand what's going on with the blockchain. But at the end, at the same time, we want to make sure that at any point, any application can have as much capacity as it needs, up until the whole block, like a whole chain, like up to what Cosmos can offer for its developers. And on the other side, if you have a lot of small applications that can live together, like they can live in one place and don't need to pay to run their own kind of chain. And so what Near is underneath is actually every single contract or account, like even my account, is a virtual chain or a virtual rollup. And then they get bundled together to kind of to optimize how much machines needed for the parallel processing based on the demand. And so, for example, Aurora, which is a kind of popular application on Near, which is actually it's a simulation of Ethereum chain on Near as a smart contract, runs on its own chain because they need that capacity for processing all their own transactions. And at the same time, they interconnect with everything else because they live in the same kind of namespace, and all of the communication happens in exactly the same way as other applications. And so, kind of the idea, like at the core, is we're trying to solve same problem as everybody else, but we started from a very different place, which is like, how do I make it simple and straightforward for people who will be using this versus kind of how are we going to retrofit or how are we going to kind of give all the power to developers, which is a different approach, but at the same time is very complex and expensive to do.
Yeah, there's always a benefit to sort of starting from a blank slate, and granted there were other projects that started, when you guys did or even after, but some like you mentioned, Ethereum obviously a few years under its belt already, and sort of have to work with what they've already done and what's been successful to date, and try to make things work and scale based on that existing structure. So if we take that a little bit of a step further and sort of you know, someone gives the benefit of the doubt that okay, this is the best technology that there is, what you guys are building with Near. The way things work in actuality is that, the best technology doesn't necessarily always win. It's not just about the best technology, it's also about, distribution and being able to get, obviously crypto being a very international phenomenon, you have to get people around the world involved in this ecosystem, developers, users, contributors, all sorts of people, evangelists. Um, what have been sort of your early strategies for sort of building up this ecosystem? Obviously, it's been quite successful. You guys didn't just like build this thing and then no one really knows about it. It's a very popular protocol that a lot of people, a lot of developers are building on it and people are using. It's not in like that top five just yet, but it's sort of right below there, and in a very short period of time. So obviously, some of these strategies have been successful. Maybe you've learned that some haven't been, and there's alternatives that you want to pursue in the future. I'm curious just to hear your approach on that, and how you've gone about it to date, and how that might change in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the kind of core inspirations, right, and kind of mentioned Google, my work at Google has been how do we build something that Google ended up building internally, but address their problems. The benefits of kind of internally in Google is that it's a very open ecosystem where you can, all of the code is in one place, all of the services are reusable and composable. You're able to contribute, you're able to kind of build on top of other services. It's pretty easy to start like internally even new projects and be able to kind of prove out some of the proof of concepts based on all the existing infrastructure, right? And obviously there's a lot of the human component, like just a massive amount of talent that exists at Google that you can really tap in and learn from. And so they built internally a very powerful ecosystem that then gets limited by a few things. And so the specific limitations that I felt were, one, that it is a permission system, right? You need to kind of be interviewed and join Google to be able to access all that. And second, which applies very like the other way around, which is like you have trouble going outside of the circle of Google, like including for product feedback and kind of talking to users and getting contributors. And the second one is the lack of internal kind of understanding of impact, right? Because Google is like 90%, or I don't know the right numbers, but like some big percentage is ads, right? And like a few other products after that. And so if you're working on one of the pieces of the ecosystem, right, which in my case, I worked on TensorFlow, for example, with a lot of other people, it was unclear how TensorFlow contributes to the bottom line of the whole company. And so you didn't have this idea of like, hey, this is the impact of this project, which is, one of probably the seminal projects in machine learning have made on the whole kind of Google company or Alphabet company. And so in result, what you're doing is you're creating like kind of artificial metrics. Like I remember using, how many other teams are using my APIs type thing, which is really kind of, an indirect way of measuring things. And so with these concepts in mind, the idea was like, how do we build a near ecosystem in such a way that, you can say it's an open Google. It's something that there's a lot of, very smart, talented people want to join. It's open, so nobody needs to get a permission to join it. They're able to kind of build on top of it, contribute to it, participate in discussions, and build their reputation. And at the same time, they're able to capture the value from the kind of what they provide to the ecosystem. And if they do something that's like the kind of with the right risk reward ratio, they get the reward. Like if they try to start some new innovative project, they should be able to capture the value of it that is proportional to the risk they've been taking to do it. And so this is where I think blockchain and crypto is actually tools to achieve this new organizational design. And so what we've been trying to do, and obviously like there's still a lot of work, but is to figure out how to build this ecosystem in such a way that it's in a way autonomous, it runs itself and it follows its patterns. So where near protocol and near kind of ecosystem is the basis, the values, the goals of the ecosystem. But then people are building infrastructure, building applications, have go-to-market investment, etc., and kind of different aspects of the whole ecosystem. They all tie together, and they at the same time have their own incentives. So specific things we've done were one, we spin out a number of teams from our core kind of original team, as well as at the end we kind of wrapped that into a different company as well, kind of pretty much having kind of a single core team at this point, which people keep asking me like, so what is core team working on? I'm like, well, they are in, I don't know, a dozen different companies at this point, being founders and being the kind of founding members to run different parts of the ecosystem. So this was, go-to-market teams like Human Guild and Proximity focused on gaming and DeFi respectively. It was infrastructure teams like Aurora and Calimero building the EVM compatibility, as well as a lot of user-facing tooling, and Calimero is building private shard for enterprises. It's kind of Pagoda, which some of the core team and a lot of the newly joined engineers are working on developer tooling and Web3 infrastructure. And so the idea is that you have this kind of lots of different pockets and verticals then to cover go to market to help people to be successful. Because at the end, it's as more and more startups join the ecosystem itself becomes like a big accelerator, right? It's like companies join and they're trying to figure out what exactly are they, how exactly they're going to market, how's they tapping into users, how's they launching their tokens, etc. And then the other strategy we've been using, and that's in many ways because kind of understanding that to be global, right? You mentioned, right, the blockchains are truly global uh, ecosystems. You need to be present locally in many different places. And so we've started with China originally, and then Ukraine and Balkans, and recently launched India and Vietnam. Is this idea of regional hubs? It's pretty much a mini version of Near Foundation, where they are running kind of their own grants program. They have a product lab. They doing contributions. Some of them doing contributions to protocol. Some of them doing business development locally. They are maybe have a fund that they can invest in. They're doing community and marketing in that region. So it's almost like sharding our own go to market both regionally and vertically, and then like through that building this ecosystem level accelerator muscle that allows startups to be successful kind of whenever they come in into this ecosystem. So that's been kind of core strategy. Obviously, there's a lot of learnings here. Some things that work, some things we continuously as a whole ecosystem improving. And yeah, I'm inviting everyone to join kind of the kind of near community to learn more, like for things that work and whatnot. And then kind of a one new bigger threat is now that we have so much decentralization in the ecosystem is how to make decisions, right? Because now it's not, a company where at the end you have hierarchy. It's like a number of independent organizations which are, tied together with common values, but have their own set of incentives and, their own tokens, how to make decisions in this. And so that's where we recently launched a near digital collective initiative, which is designed to build a ecosystem level governance. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest learnings and something that I've been kind of trying to work on since 2018. It's like, how do we make decisions in a decentralized way while still being able to kind of move quickly and make decisions that sometimes will leave some people uncomfortable, right? Because like that's at the end, if decisions are always everybody's happy with, then that's just not going to work. And so NDC is currently right now in progress. There's like a lot of different people contributing to this effort to build this kind of decision making muscle for the ecosystem and allow all of these parties to participate and contribute their input.
Yeah, I think that's well, it's, first of all, a super interesting answer. I really like the analogy of like sharding the foundation itself through these different geographies and then also decentralizing the core team to working on these different projects, no longer a part of the same organization, but working, within the same ecosystem, having their own go-to-markets and everything like that. I know you've been a fan, or at least I read that you've been a big believer in like the ability of small teams to, work in parallel for a long time. I think you built something, even very early in your career that had like a bunch of small teams working on a bunch of different things towards like a similar mission. And it reminds me of, I think Bezos at Amazon had a rule of like no team
Yeah,
bigger
two
than a
pizza.
pizza.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And then also it actually even more so reminds me of I think like at Apple, Steve Jobs would have different teams working on the same project without knowing it. And of course, near it's more like transparent and stuff, but nonetheless, you've got different people from the core team breaking off and working on some things that are probably at least tangential if not competitive in a way, but all within the ecosystem. And so it's sort of if you grow the pie large enough, even if you don't, come in first place as like the best app on Near, you build the system large enough that you have overwhelming success along all these other apps and whatnot. Um, but I think what's interesting and the challenge that you brought up is like, it's easier like Bezos with that strategy, he could always come down and make the decision and Jobs could always say, okay, well, this team is now clearly outperforming this team. So we're going to shut this team down and have them work on something else. And this is how we're going to go forward. There's that like executive control. And you guys decided obviously like this was the right time to decentralize the organization a bit and spin these different teams out, but it brought this challenge of governance that you've mentioned. And so I'm curious, um, with the Near Digital Collective, what are some of like, how do you even begin to approach this question? Because it's an extremely difficult question. It's basically, how do you govern? How do you make decisions? Those are like the highest level decision, the highest level questions basically possible. This is what countries deal with, let alone companies. So I'm curious, what principles you sort of come into that, keeping in mind, and any thoughts you've had thus far, what might work, what doesn't seem to work, how you can sort of keep that speed of execution and have some sort of effective executive decision making with while maintaining sort of a decentralized team.
Yeah, no, you're right. This is probably the most complex question that humanity has is like, how do we coordinate our work when everybody has their own kind of like, even if they live in the same country, but they still have their own self-interests. And so, yeah, I mean, it's akin to building a government. The benefit is that, well, A, we can start from scratch, similar to how we did with blockchain. And B, we have a tool now to help with people coordination, which I don't like. I look at governments and I see the result of kind of the communication and the geography and geopolitics as an out like being the kind of inputs that shape the government, right? The U.S. government, the kind of the federal government structure is very much because the states were so far away. They would send people to go to the DC because it took like 2 3 weeks to get there, and so they would send them there to kind of represent the state and then have a lot of autonomy to run things on the ground. Because the United States were formed at the time when that was kind of the fastest way to communicate. The more modern, like more governments that kind of been formed more recently have different shape of things, and so the kind of we have a really kind of novel opportunity here to form this, and I think it's really important to leverage this. And at the same time, it's like, well, what are the things that we want to optimize for, right? So I think the ability to make decisions, informed decisions, at the kind of most at the tightest group possible is probably one of the biggest design goals. So think of it as like if somebody wants to update how like state transition is getting stored into the database on across the protocol, they should not need a kind of a full referendum of all the people in the community to participate in that, right? There should be like a protocol experts who are able to kind of evaluate and make an informed decisions from that. At the same time, if somebody similarly suggests some technical change, but it impacts the whole ecosystem, for example, changing the inflation schedule, kind of the reward schedule, that needs to be kind of surfaced and augmented with expert opinions and with kind of information that different people are able to consume to be able to reason about it, a different set of stakeholders. And so kind of the other side of the goal is like, how do we represent all of the stakeholders given we don't have, like one person, one vote, but also like we don't actually have one person, right? We have companies, we have projects, we have DAOs that also represent, we have validators. So like there's no like monotonicity of stakeholders as well, which is usually true about the well, in a design goal of the governments, where of the democratic governments with one person, one vote. So the ideas we've been exploring is this ideas of that kind of a multi-house Congress, which takes on different responsibilities. So there's a House of Stake, which is people voting with their stake, and kind of the more they either delegate or the longer the stake, that gives them more vote. But at the same time, if you have like kind of reducing proportion, like to not make it that if you have million tokens versus 10 tokens, you have 100,000 times more, but maybe like only 10,000 or 1,000 times more power. So like being able to quadratic voting type thing around that. At the same time, and this is like maybe a kind of more broader referendum style decisions, where it's like, hey, do we want this to happen, or if other branches of this NDC are not operating as the ecosystem as a whole is expected. The second part is called House of Merit. This idea that we want to surface people who actually are full time in the ecosystem, who are continuously contributing to the ecosystem. So they are kind of contributing to public goods of the ecosystem, and so through that they should represent the kind of ecosystem decision making. There usually will be some types of experts, right, in different fields as well, like as they are contributing to this. And so that is more of a think of kind of place where more tactical, but I was saying, like, I mean, decisions like, hey, should we create a new vertical for investment because there's clearly need, there's like a new dimension, that a new use case, and we don't have a team that's responsible for that. And then there's a lot of work groups, which are kind of this more, scoped down versions of this, potentially with the same people kind of being members, who are making decisions on the specific things. Like, for example, there's a protocol work group, right, that makes decisions around how protocol is evolving. There's a contract standards work group. There's a governance work group itself, right, that continuously trying to innovate on this and propose, like, and currently working on the design itself. So kind of there's the scoped versions that are designed to be like handling the day to day of the innovation, and then there's a House of Merit, which is kind of think of it as like decides on kind of larger initiatives, and can be like it is consists of experts and people who are contributing continuously to the ecosystem, and then there's a broader representation of the whole ecosystem through House of Stake.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I'm not envious of being in your position to try to figure all of this stuff out. But I'm very, very interested to see how everything plays out, and what the design ends up being, and what it optimizes for, and what you try to optimize for versus what actually happens, and all of this. It's going to be a very interesting few years and decade ahead, not just for Near, but for Web3 more broadly, and a bunch of different aspects as well. And I think that's a good place to sort of wrap things up with one final question. You've sort of, your early career was focused on ML and AI, and spent a long time there. Near, in fact, was originally, as you mentioned, sort of built to be more of an AI company. And now obviously you've spent the last several years working in blockchain and Web3 and everything like this. And of course, these are like two, trend lines that seem to just be going up basically exponentially. And especially like AI's got a lot of hype around it lately with Stable Diffusion and OpenAI, GPT-3, and everything like this. Whereas crypto's fallen into a bit of a lull in terms of prices, at least, but the builder enthusiasm seems to be, at or near all-time highs. So both of these things, obviously, like you can be really deep in one or really deep in the other, and think you understand how the next 3, 5, 10 years might play out. But it's really hard because like they impact each other. All of these different trend lines in the world, they're not like mutually exclusive. And so you have a pretty good understanding, I imagine, of obviously blockchain being what you're primarily focused on these days in Web3, but also AI from, all the time you spent there. So I'm curious if you could speak to, how you see these two things sort of converging and impacting each other in the years to come, and where we are now, and where we might be headed in a few different aspects.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think the AI trend is definitely, it has a very step function like feeling. And so every time there's a step function, people get really excited, and then it dies down while the people working, the people actually working on the next step um, happening, right? So kind of this step function happened over past year with GPT-3, with Stable Diffusion, with Fjord, DALL-E, etc. Kind of truly showcasing that it can capture not just memorize something, but actually captures the principles of language or images, and then kind of create new novel things, as well as start to do some basic reasoning. And so as the next step is really expanding on how the reasoning works. But I think at the same time, where the limitations are right now is that there's very small number of kind of researchers and people in general who have access to ability to like innovate on these things because of very expensive compute requirements. And so this is where Stability AI has done an amazing job of like kind of building that compute and then open sourcing the model that everybody else can then play around and build on top. And so I think where kind of blockchain and governance and incentives come in is really, and will be kind of coming together with AI in coming year, I think, is in this intersection of like, how do we make it open source, community owned, community operated in such a way that both more people have access to it. At the same time, we are need to be like mindful of like how it's used as well, and like what applications are really just targeted to. But at the same time, we cannot kind of, as a world, we cannot afford these capabilities to be limited to a few, companies, for-profit companies especially. And so I think that's where, that's why I think governance is actually a really important component, not just for near ecosystem, kind of, to make decisions about near, but actually to make decisions about things like, other public goods that AI will become as it becomes more and more open and kind of accessible. At the same time, creating incentives around it, creating incentives to generate, generate enough capital or enough compute resources to then train really complex large models and give access to various researchers is something that blockchain, I think Juan Bennett says it really well. It's like the tokens are ability to borrow from the future really give us. And so I think these two spaces are going to be coming together closer and closer. And as I said, like we started with crowdsourcing because that's probably the simplest of this like coordination problems that blockchain actually can lend a hand on. But I think there'll be more and more of this places where these things intersect.
Yeah, well, it's definitely going to be a wild few years, and I can't begin to imagine what's coming. But it seems like there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and I'm very fortunate to speak with people like you who are out there building it on the podcast. So appreciate you coming on today and taking the time, and through this conversation, but even more so beforehand preparing for it. I'm very excited about Near and what the future holds for Near specifically and the whole ecosystem. So looking forward to following along for months and years to come. Where's the best place for people to go who want to get involved, whether they're builders or just curious, people who might be potential users of various apps and holders of Near and things like that? Where's the best place for them to go and get involved?
Well, so near.org is definitely a great starting place. You can learn more about Near. You can learn, like, there's developer docs, there's kind of how to join this like ecosystem accelerator, right? How to apply and kind of connect to different places in the ecosystem. And there's, applications for people to use, kind of and become a user. You can obviously follow on Twitter Near Protocol. and check out my Twitter, IL Black Dragon, for kind of news and what's going on in the ecosystem. And then yeah, just kind of through that, join near.chat, which is Discord for kind of more broader community discussions in the ecosystem, folks.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Ilya. I really appreciate the time and very much enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.